When I started this podcast in April, it was something to pass the time during this pandemic, Season 1. After a long hiatus over the summer, I became more active and united with the League of Extraordinary Podcasters, Season 2. But there was still more that I wanted to do, further push the boundaries, and make something that was never made before. And so, it is now time to turn your attention to the Season 2K21 premiere of the Titantron.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It is now time.
A little bit of the bubbly.
To turn your attention to
Because that's the bottom line.
the Titantron.
And welcome to the Season 2K21 premiere of the Titantron. I am your host, Anthony Cerulli, and we are starting completely fresh today. Yes, Season 2K21, you heard it here first. New format, but of course the same me. Before we get into today's episode, make sure to go ahead and follow me on Instagram at the Titantron Podcast, as well as on Twitter at _Titantron. Also, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are almost at the big 100, so I know that we can get there possibly by the end of this month. Who knows? Also, we are on audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, all of those. We are on there. Make sure to leave a good review for us there. I have a big announcement at the end of today's episode, so make sure to stick around for that. But before we get there, we have a lot to get into, so stick around for our first segment called The 5 Count after this commercial break. Stay tuned, you're listening to the Titantron. And welcome back to the Titantron. I'm hyped up. I'm ready to go. Let's get straight into today's episode, where we're going to be kicking off the season premiere of the Titantron with the first segment, and that is, of course, being called the 5 Count. 5 Count is going to be a recurring segment here on the Titantron, so get ready for it. It's going to be breaking down everything from last Friday to this Friday in 5 minutes or less, giving you my hottest takes, biggest takeaways of the week, different stuff like that. So anyways, let's get things kicked off with last Friday, where we saw Shinsuke Nakamura finally being utilized as a main event talent on SmackDown, or at least it seems like he is. He had a great showing against the likes of Rey Mysterio, and even the dream match that we all want to see against Daniel Bryan. The ending was the first time in a while that I genuinely got annoyed at a wrestling match, but for all the right reasons. And that's because the WWE is known for doing these excellent underdog stories within these gauntlet matches. You know, we're talking Kofi Kingston, Seth Rollins, and now, of course, Shinsuke Nakamura. No difference there. So it looks like Adam Pearce, yes, the official Adam Pearce, is going to be challenging Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble for his title. You know, we're going to talk about that more down the line when we get closer to the show, but I think it has potential to be a pretty interesting storyline. I should also mention that we have new tag team champions on SmackDown with Ziggler and Rude. Not too hyped about them getting the titles, but they definitely need to get it off of the Street Profits, so kind of a thumbs up there. Anyways, let's get into Saturday, where we had Impact Wrestling's first big show of the year, and that is, of course, being Genesis. I'm going to be real with you. I didn't watch it, but I did watch the main event, which was the I Quit match between Moose and Willie Mack. It was a pretty good match. I gave it 3.5 stars. A lot of people were rating it higher than that, but I look at it like, you know, there's nice storytelling, hard-hitting spots, but it dragged on for a lot of times during the match, more than I was hoping for, so I had to break it down a little bit there. But still a pretty good match. So now it looks like we're seeing Moose versus Rich Swann as the next story for the main title, but that leaves me wondering, is Kenny Omega even winning this title? Like, you know, is he going to be the belt collector that we really want him to be? If not, then what's the point of Impact pairing up with AEW and putting Kenny Omega in Impact? I don't know. I don't get it. But anyways, let's move on to Monday, where we saw Monday Night Raw. So SmackDown, I gave a B+. It was a really good show. Raw, on the other hand, gonna give it a D. Sorry. You know, it was a much better show than last week with the Legends Night and everything, but, you know, that's not really saying much with the lack of Drew McIntyre, get well soon, and this bland yet strange storyline between Lacey Evans, Ric Flair, and Charlotte Flair, who I gotta say, Charlotte Flair has been very underwhelming since her return to the ring. That's just me personally. Triple H's appearance was a lot more exciting than I was expecting it to be, just because it was a breath of fresh air, if you will, in this Raw show. But, you know, this whole Randy Bray storyline, it's just not cutting it for me. Hopefully Edge can return soon to save us from this dumpster fire of a storyline. No pun intended, pun intended. Also, this is a perfect example of why the show needs to be cut down to 2 hours, because the roster is paper thin, doesn't have any stars, and having guys wrestle twice on the same show like Keith Lee did this past Monday is not cutting it, and it's not the answer. Let's move on to Wednesday, where, of course, Wednesday being the biggest day of the week for wrestling, it seems. With AEW, I gave the show a C because, it was a pretty good show all around. Darby Allin versus Cage, it didn't really impress me as much as a lot of people are hyping it up to be. I gave it around 3 stars, maybe a half more at most. What I did take away from the show is that AEW has zero plans for Sting, and it's starting to show. They're pairing him up with Darby Allin. I think that's cool, but where are we going with this? It's taking way too long. There was a lot of good on the show. Eddie Kingston versus Pac was probably my match of the night, but equally as bad with the worst segment of the year so far in Britt Baker's audition to replace Jerry Springer, featuring your favorite wrestler and mine, Cody Rhodes. Last week's part 1 of New Year's Smash was definitely a lot better. As we move on to NXT, I gave a B-, and this was really due in part to MSK debuting, and I think that they are tag team champions in the making. I view them in the same way that I view DIY when they first came in, and if handled properly, an underdog tag team title win could really put the NXT tag division back where it once was, so I'm looking forward to seeing that from MSK. Pete Dunne versus Finn Balor seems to be the match for the next takeover. Honestly, Pete winning the title could be huge for the stable to really put them on top with Pat McAfee and Birch and Lorcan. But you still got to look out for the Undisputed Era. They're still an interesting team to talk about when discussing the NXT title picture. I'm feeling we're going to see like Cole versus Dunn in a number 1 contendership match, which will lead to TakeOver where Balor will face probably Dunn. But that's for a later day. As we finally discuss Thursday with NXT UK, I usually don't watch NXT UK, but I did this week to see Walter versus A-Kid, which was a good match without context. Here's why. I wish that they had built him up a bit more. It felt out of the blue for A-Kid to be so evenly matched with Walter in this match. Now, I'd still give the match like 3.5 to 4 stars, but a bit more of an underdog narrative for someone who was barely on TV before this recent push for A-Kid seemed needed for a huge match with the champ. But besides that, pretty good match. So that's all I had for this week. Those are my biggest takeaways, and I hope that you all enjoyed this past week in wrestling. I certainly did, and I'm looking towards the future for more great wrestling. Enjoy what you want to enjoy. Everything's great. Anyways, let's get straight on to our next segment, and that is, of course, the underrated match of the week. And welcome on back. Hope you're enjoying today's episode. I am personally loving this new format for the podcast. We're keeping things more concise, to the point, and I'm all for it because, as you know, the Titantron Podcast is your number 1 podcast to get you your information and get you the hell out of here. So I'd say we're sticking pretty well to that slogan. If you're enjoying today's episode, make sure to go ahead and give me a like and a comment. If you're on YouTube, go and leave me some feedback. Let me know what you think. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say about this new rebranding of the Titantron Podcast. With all of that blabber out of the way, let's get into our next segment, which is the underrated match of the week. Now, on this segment, I will be talking about matches that I believe don't get talked about nearly enough. You compare it to the more iconic matches of Rock Austin, Cena Punk, HBK Undertaker, matches like those that, everyone talks about, 5-star matches. I don't think these matches get nearly enough praise as they should. And that's why I'm here, to talk about them and hopefully give you a reason to watch them after you listen to the Titantron Podcast. But anyways, let's get straight to it. I usually am going to give you 1 to 2 matches, but this week it's Go Big or Go Home season premiere. I'm going to give you 4 matches to check out. So the first one has some familiar names. It's Edge versus Christian from the May 17th, 2010 Monday Night Raw. Now, around this time, Randy Orton was feuding with Edge. Oh, how the times have changed. And they were in a pick your poison situation on the Go Home show to, I believe it was Over the Limit. Now, pick your poison, if you don't know, it's basically a wrestler picks an opponent for their rival. So basically Edge picked Orton's opponent, Orton picked Edge's opponent. I don't know who Edge picked for Orton, but I do know, like we see here, that Orton picked SmackDown's Christian to be Edge's opponent. Now, there's a lot of significance to this match. Obviously, these two were probably one of the greatest WWE tag teams of all time, best friends, and we've seen them in matches before, but I don't think that this match gets nearly enough talk as the other ones do. We saw them for the Intercontinental title and ladder match and other matches that I'm drawing a blank on right now, but we've never seen the Rated R Superstar versus Captain Charisma, those forms of Edge and Christian, go to battle. So I think this was a really cool dynamic. And of course, if you would probably guess, this was a really great match, and I highly recommend going checking it out. I'll leave the links to all of these matches in the comments below on both the audio and video formats, so I got you hooked up there. Next match, I'm going to give you a little bit of an entertainment value here, and that's Joey Janela versus Jimmy Lloyd from GCW, and it's social distance rules. Yeah, so, you know, you have to look at 2020, the year that never ends, in a more positive light now. You know, we finally ended the year, so let's look at a match that fully encapsulates this year, and that's through social distance rules, and it basically is just that. They don't touch in the entire match, they do their moves, they find ways to, you know, beat each other up without touching each other. It is the match that Jim Cornette is probably the biggest fan of, I'm sure of it. There's no way that I can explain this match. You got to go ahead and watch it. It's amazing to see. It's not wrestling. Well, it is wrestling, but it's an interesting form of wrestling. I'll put it at that. Another entertaining match that you should go ahead and check out is the Corporate Royal Rumble. You know, this was in 1999. I believe this was the Raw after Mankind won the title. You know, huge ovation for him there. But this was basically the corporation going up against DX in a Corporate Royal Rumble. And the winner of that match would go on to be number 30 in the official Royal Rumble match. Push comes to shove, the corporation outnumbers DX a lot of the match, and the rules are going to get changed within the match in true Attitude Era form. You know, you see a lot of great names in here, the likes of Triple H, Test, Kane, New Age Outlaws, X-Pac, great names. Go ahead and check out this match. It's a quick one too. It'll get you a bang for your buck, and it's really entertaining. I actually watched it the other day, and really fun stuff. And finally, a very great yet underrated match from WrestleMania 27, one of the more, you know, lackluster manias, but it did have Cody Rhodes versus Rey Mysterio. This was a match I remember fondly because I was younger at the time and I hated Cody Rhodes. Still do now, but this was around the time that he was undashing Cody Rhodes, and Rey Mysterio with his Captain America gear had a pretty solid match on a bleh WrestleMania 27 card. So like I said, I'll be linking all of these matches in the comments below, and I hope that you get the chance to go ahead and check them out. So that's all I have for the underrated matches. Hope you get the chance to check out all of them. But let's get into the final segment of the day, which is the top fives. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to wrap up today's episode with our final segment, and that is top fives. Top fives, pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to be giving a topic, and I will be giving you my top fives on said topic. Straightforward. I'm not going to be doing this every week, but every once in a while I'll bring in a new topic and I'll bring it up for discussion. Today's topic is presented by the Ring Fanatics Podcast. They put out a tweet the other day asking their fan base, big shout out to them, by the way, you know, what are your favorite top 5 Royal Rumble matches of all time? Now, considering the fact that I've only been a wrestling fan for about a decade now, I kind of have to change the question for myself a little bit and only keep it to the top 5 Royal Rumble matches of the past decade, from 2010 to 2020. Can't include 2021 because it didn't happen yet. I do need to address the fact that none of these top 5 Rumbles are my favorite of all time. My favorite Rumble of all time has to be 2008, just because you add all the factors of HBK and The Undertaker starting 1 and 2, and then, you know, all the returns like Jimmy Snuka and Roddy Piper, and then even, you know, the meme is on Twitter, the WWE 2008 roster is stacked. And that's especially true here when you look at the likes of, you know, Mark Henry, CM Punk, Batista, Triple H, and of course the number 30 entrant, big return, John Cena. Cena returning was a huge thing, you know, big surprise here, and I have to go out on a limb here and say that this is probably the top all-time final 3 in a Rumble match, based on star power, and Batista, Triple H, and John Cena kind of speaks for itself. So with personal bias, because that being the first ever Rumble I ever watched, I kind of have to put it number 1 for my list. But if we're looking at the last 10 years, number 5, I'm going to say 2012, which is an interesting pick because not a lot of people are a fan of Sheamus winning that Rumble. They think Jericho should have won. I'm a little on the edge about it. Not really sure who should have won, but we did get Sheamus at the end of the day. But that's not really a reason to look, you know, poorly at this Rumble. If you look at it as a whole, it's a really solid Rumble and very underrated. Sheamus and Chris Jericho as the final two was a really good matchup. And then you look at all the returns and the surprise entrance. All the commentary team showing up was a really funny, something that we never seen before. Jerry Lawler, Booker T, and Michael Cole, and then Karma being the third woman in history to enter a Royal Rumble match. And then you have like Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Mick Foley, Mr. Sacco versus the Cobra, which was a very fun spot. Overall, this was just a really fun Rumble, and I remember it fondly because I was younger at that point, so this was all just, funny stuff being thrown my way. Top tier PG era Rumble right there. Number 4, I'm going to put 2016. This was the one versus all Rumble where Roman Reigns defended his WWE Championship against 29 other men in the Royal Rumble. And I'm basically putting it here for one reason, and that's AJ Styles. Styles' debut is probably the all-time greatest debut in Royal Rumble history, and he has left a huge impact on the company ever since making that debut. But I mean, you just look at the roster in that Rumble, and it shows how stacked the roster was at that point. You look at the likes of Dean Ambrose, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, Chris Jericho, some of those guys who are still making huge impacts on the company today. But also a huge name that you have to mention is the winner, Triple H, showing up and basically taking the Rumble for himself, which I think was a really smart move, but led to a lackluster main event of WrestleMania. But that's besides the point. Anyways, number 3, I'm going to put 2018, which in my eyes is I keep saying the word underrated today, but this is the most underrated Royal Rumble of all time. You look at that final 6, the new gen versus the old guard, going at it. The Rey Mysterio return was huge. It was a really big thing. The NXT names like Adam Cole really spiced up the whole match. And then just the final 6, that's really what is the cream of the crop of this whole thing. And even more specifically, the final 4, Nakamura, Finn Balor, John Cena, and Roman Reigns getting those matchups was a really cool dynamic. And ultimately, just the final few moments of that match has to be why I'm putting this so highly in my list. And plus Nakamura, I've already mentioned his name. Love the guy. King of Strong style, guys. Number 2, I'm going with 2010. 2010 is a overlooked Rumble. It's due to the fact because there wasn't a lot of surprise entrants, of course, outside of, Edge. But, it really shows the talent that was on the 2010 roster at that point. A huge narrative also in that match was Shawn Michaels trying to win and prove himself to be ready to face The Undertaker. That started the whole retirement angle, and I thought that was excellent. But of course, I put it here because of Edge. Edge was huge. It was a big thing. No one saw it coming, really. I'm sure this was 10 years ago, so I don't remember, but it seemed like no one knew it was coming, or at least coming so soon, which led to the match with Jericho. But just a great moment, great Edge return. Also, I have to mention CM Punk, him carrying the first, 10 entrants, really, of the Rumble, making it his own. Straight Edge Society. Punk is probably my favorite version of CM Punk, and it was great all around. And then we get to number 1, and maybe it's recency bias, but 2020 is my favorite Royal Rumble of the past 10 years. Brock Lesnar, dominating the first half of the Rumble, and then you have some really cool stories in between with, of course, Drew McIntyre ultimately winning, and then Edge making another return. So you can kind of see the parallels of 2020 and 2010 here. First half of the match being dominated by one person, CM Punk, Brock Lesnar, Edge making a return, different stories intertwined. But I think 2020 really did it well. Just an overall great showing. Brock Lesnar looked like a beast. He went up against really a lot of his older rivals by that point. Kofi Kingston, Rey Mysterio. We saw him up against Keith Lee, which was a huge thing. And then you have MVP making his return, and just overall epic stuff. So like I said, maybe it's because it was so soon, but ultimately I have to say that 2020 is my favorite Royal Rumble of the past 10 years. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy to say that we are finally done with today's episode, the Season 2K21 premiere of the Titantron Podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a like, drop a follow, drop a subscribe, wherever you're listening. Be a part of the Titantron family. But wait, there's more. Like I mentioned, there are two huge announcements. Number one, we are releasing our own merchandise. We are pairing up with Teespring, and once we get the links out, we will be able to put out to you some of the best merchandise that you have ever worn. The Titantron logo will be on it. You will see different shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, face masks, you name it, we'll have it for you. So we got that. And number two, the Titantron Podcast will be starting up our very own website very soon. They're still in the works. We're still trying to figure it out. But at the end of the day, we will have a website going and running, and we'll review some wrestling. We'll talk about wrestling, and everything will be about wrestling. Don't you worry. So I hope you are excited for those two announcements. I certainly am. Ultimately, I want to thank you for yet another great episode, and I cannot wait for the future of the Titantron Podcast. But until then, take care.